All right. And we've answered Nate's urgent question when I'm going to go live again. And the answer is tonight, less than less than 24 hours later. I bet you weren't expecting that, but huzzah, I'm here. I'm always eager to confound expectations and demolish the presumptions of my viewership, my audience. Hey, GW, you are first. That is correct. Maybe not the first to click on the video, but definitely the first to comment, as far as I can see. One of three current viewers, and as you can tell by the title, I'm going to be talking about Kamala Harris. Hey, John. Hi, Seth. And you're third. It's correct. It's unusual to actually nail that in chronological order. Usually, the person who posts first is usually fifth or sixth or 12th, depending upon how heavily trafficked the channel is. Fortunately, a lot of people don't watch my channel, so if you actually do comment first, chances are, more often than not, you'll be first. Likewise, second or third. So, I mean, that's one of the benefits of commenting and watching a infrequently watched, lightly trafficked YouTube channel, such as myself. Uh, but yeah, so I'm going to be talking about Joe Biden's heir apparent, in case you were wondering. And I did a brief check, and it turns out that the last video I made, the first and last, as far as I know, I can't recall if I made another one subsequent to this to that, but the last video I made touching on Kamala Harris's candidacy was in 2018 in October. So almost nearly 2 years ago. It's horrifying to think of how long our presidential campaigns last in the United States, that you can make a video almost 2 years ago about the presidential campaign, and it's still going on. We have another, let's see, where are we? We're not even in the middle of August, so we have another one, two, we have 2.5 months more to go of this presidential campaign. Yeah, Biden, if he's elected, I don't know what he'll be the second Catholic president for assuming he makes it through inauguration until the 27th Amendment is invoked, and then we'll have the first Baptist slash Hindu president. And this is a point I wanted to. I'm going to make a uh, broader argument here, which touches on my first video. But in my first video, which turned out to be eerily prescient, I said that, and this is the tag at the end of my first Kamala Harris video, I said that her prior experience as a district attorney, as Attorney General of California, would not sit well with the Democratic electorate. Now, keep in mind, I made this video 2 years before Black Lives Matter and Antifa and their assorted allies among the George Soros bankrolled district attorneys and attorney generals throughout the United States, throughout Blue America, decided to give their sanction to a full-scale insurrection. So I made this video before there was widespread rebellion and violent assaults, looting, pillaging happening in blue cities like Portland and Minneapolis. None of that was occurring at the end of 2018, as far as I know. And it turned out to be eerily prescient, because her profile, even though she quickly pivoted to a far left sort of social justice married to kind of like a woke capitalism platform, even though she quickly pivoted to that, eschewing her prior stances in favor of the quote unquote carceral state. Even though she made a quick pivot, she still did not ingratiate herself with Democratic voters, and she dropped out, I think, before the Iowa caucuses. I could be mistaken, but again, it's been so long ago, and I have a sieve-like memory, so I lost track of the first 12 Democratic also-rans whose candidacies flamed out. I basically remember the Biden Sanders, the kind of sad denouement to the Democratic primary between Biden and Sanders. Yeah, okay. Thanks, John. So I was right. Yeah, she dropped out before her campaign didn't even leave the launch pad. I mean, Marianne Williamson stuck around. Well, I think she left when her campaign was essentially bankrupt, when the last hippie hedge fund managers who believe in transcendental meditation in Davenport, Iowa, basically refused to cut her a check. That's when she declared. But she lasted through I think Super Tuesday, but Kamala Harris never got off the ground. But it turns out my video was right. That was a huge turnoff, even before the Democratic Party came out in full support of anarcho-communism. She still, even the brief rumblings of that revolution took her out. But I also something else that was accurate and which might explain her selection as vice president is the fact that she. Okay, see, I knew George Washington would remember with would have the mental acuity to remember how it played out. Beto, Beto, I forgot about him. But another part of my video that was accurate and which might explain her selection as Biden's presumptive replacement once he's shunted off into the East Wing or whatever they do with presidents who aren't able to. Whenever he goes into the Woodrow Wilson wing of the White House, another part of the video that was accurate, and it was surprising since the video was so short. I said Kamala Harris would kind of be she had the perfect profile, putting aside her experience as a law and order DA. Putting that aside, she had the perfect cosmetic profile for a Democratic nominee. And as I said earlier, the Democratic Party has become post-American, and even though there's still a significant minority, a chunk of the Democratic Party that's still is clinging to the Democratic Party, even though they themselves are patriotic. And you meet these people occasionally. I mean, I've known them myself, Democrats who are liberal but still believe in the United States, even though they espouse liberal positions on a lot of social or economic issues. They're still somewhat patriotic, even though you still have a huge, I wouldn't call it a huge, but you still have a significant minority of those voters in the Democratic Party. They've been sufficiently marginalized that the Democratic Party, at least nationally, can come out as a post-American party. Now, this was a label that was attached to George McGovern in 1972, basically because the Democratic Party, after the debacle of 1968, when Hubert Humphrey was coronated despite not having the support of a majority of Democrats, and Richard Daley ran the Chicago convention to uh, basically ran it as his own little fiefdom. After that, they changed the rules so that there would be more input from uh, supposed progressives and minorities and women. And that's where you got the 1972 Chicago Convention, which had all of these radical components to the platform. And Nixon tarred George McGovern. I think his tagline was acid, amnesty, and abortion in 72. In other words, if you elected George McGovern, you would have abortion, you would have amnesty for draft evaders, and you would have basically drug legalization. And it was a bit of a slur when you actually look at George McGovern. He was a patriotic person. He was a war veteran, a World War II vet. He also was not that radical. In fact, he, unlike the class that was ushered in 1974 in the wake, they call them Watergate babies. Unlike that group of Democrats, he actually was pretty, especially by today's standards, he was comparatively moderate. I mean, he supported sending weapons to South Vietnam, even though he favored withdrawal and ending American involvement on the grounds. Okay, that's something I didn't know. Thanks. I stand corrected. It was Sergeant Shriver. Um, but yeah, like I said, he supported continuing military. I think he supported continuing military shipments to the South Vietnamese army. He was also, especially after he got defeated in the 80s in the Senate, he came out, he started his own business and became more in favor of lower taxation and regulation. So McGovern actually was not that much, wasn't really a radical leftist, even though that was how he was tagged by the Nixon campaign. In fact, it's kind of questionable whether or not, I mean, Nixon, especially in terms of domestic policy, was probably one of the most liberal presidents of the 20th century. If McGovern wasn't going to win the election, but it's debatable whether or not he actually would have had a more liberal administration if he had been elected. In retrospect, of course, but yeah, but that was kind of the cleavage back then in the Democratic Party. You had a sort of radical pro, not even anti-war. There was a huge anti-war faction, but there was also a faction represented by the SDS and the hippie movement. But even after that, groups like the Weather Underground, you still had these people who sort of infiltrated the Democratic Party in the following years, and gradually they were pushed back briefly by the New Democrats and the DLC, but now it seems to be, they seem to have succeeded in taking over the Democratic Party. So even though you don't have socialists in a traditional sense, in the Marxian sense of in the sense of uh, redistribution on a federal level and the nationalization of industries, you do have you don't have traditional socialism. What you have is sort of cultural Marxism and woke capitalism married to anti-Americanism and kind of the reshaping of what's considered the American society. So the the Norman Thomas style socialism that the left advocated hasn't succeeded in capturing the Democratic Party, but you do have the hard left, which wants to reshape the United States in functional control over over the party. And in a sense, and this is something I mentioned in my earlier video, even though I said Kamala Harris is not going to be the standard bearer for the Democratic Party, she is, in a sense, a reflection of the future. And you saw glimpses of this in Barack Obama, because if you look at Barack Obama's profile, it's very similar in a lot of ways to Kamala Harris. The fact that he had a Kenyan father who was not just it wasn't just the fact that his father was Kenyan, but his father was a Kenyan who was an avowed Marxist, who was obviously a deadbeat. But if you look at the history of his father actually tried to, once Kenya obtained independence from Great Britain, his father tried to insinuate himself into the government and push Jomo Kenyatta's new government into adopting a Marxist revolutionary stance. And eventually he was sidelined. He became a chronic alcoholic. He died in a car crash. Barack Obama describes all of this in his memoir, Dreams of My Father. For those of you who are interested in it, it actually is. There's a great biography of Barack Obama by the civil rights historian David Garrow, which is worth reading. It's over 1,000 pages long, and I know that seems like a lot. It is kind of a doorstop, and there are a lot of details that are unnecessary, but it's definitely worth reading. I did a review of it for this channel last year, I believe, or the year before. You can find it if you do a search. But yeah, but Barack Obama's father was Kenyan. He was not American, but he was also a hardcore Marxist who tried to infuse his vision, his very unsophisticated economic theories, like most, well, like all socialists. He didn't understand price calculation. He believed in the labor theory of value. He didn't really understand economics, so he tried to steer Kenya, the newly independent Kenya, into adopting his theories, and he was unsuccessful. He became an embittered old man. He was a bigamist. But yeah, so his father was that. He was a Kenyan Marxist. His mother was also a Marxist, but also someone who ostensibly was from the United States. She was an American citizen, but she lived most of her life overseas, and not just overseas in in the UK or Australia or somewhere in the Anglosphere that had a similar sort of polity to the United States. She lived overseas in Indonesia, and again, she was a Marxist. He was raised in Hawaii in the Punahou, I'm probably butchering that name, which is a very prominent high school, which Sun Yat-sen, I think, also went to, or when he was living in Hawaii. He was Sun Yat-sen, who was the first person to the first revolutionary to fight for a republic in China. He lived in exile in Hawaii. I think he went there, but it's a very Tony upper crust high school in Hawaii. So yeah, so you had Obama who was raised in a sort of post-American environment, even though by the time he was a senator and a president, he had very conventional political opinions. He wasn't Obama, at least during his first term and his first run for the presidency, wasn't all that different from a conventional kind of doctrinaire liberal, like a center-left candidate that you would expect to have grown up in St. Louis but his profile, cosmetically, it was a very post-American political profile. And the same thing applies to Kamala, um, Kamala Harris. Now, her parents, who were very well educated, very intelligent. I think her father was a Jamaican uh, economist, I believe, and her mother was a Tamil endocrinologist. So she was a doctor, I think, or was or is. I might have reversed those, but she had these two very well educated parents who pursued postdoc or doctoral education in the United States, kind of like Barack Obama's mother, Ann Dunham, only in reverse. She went to Indonesia to pursue this PhD that she never quite completed. But again, it's very similar if you look at their profiles. So she had a Jamaican father and a Tamil Indian mother, who ultimately divorced, who came to the United States for post graduate education, and she lived here up until 12. And what happened when she became 12? When she turned 12, her family moved to Montreal. So she was essentially raised in Quebec. And then when she did return to the United States, where did she live? In California. Now, California of the 80s or 70s or 60s, you could say it was kind of an extension of the American dream. You had and probably one of the best novels ever written, one of the best American novels ever written about this was The Grapes of Wrath. You had the depiction of the Okies kind of traveling almost in this biblical narrative, traveling out to California, which was seen as the promised land. And if you read any biographies of Ronald Reagan, oh, really? Oh, I didn't know that. If you read any biographies of Ronald Reagan, it always describes it that way. When Ronald Reagan was in Illinois, or when he was a radio sportscaster in Iowa, he always thought of California and talked about this later on in life. When he went to Eureka College, he thought of California as this extension of the American dream, where all of his life's great opportunities were seized. And it was kind of seen that way by most Americans. But if you look at California in the 21st century, Larry Schweikart is a great. I love following his Twitter. I know he's written a lot of books, like the history. What is it? Conservative history of the United States. I'm probably. That's probably not the title. I can't remember the title off the top of my head, but he has written a lot of great books about American history and politics. But if you look at California in the 21st century, it's almost it's its own little state. It really is a post-American state. And you see this when you see the Attorney General of California, Javier Becerra. He's always suing the Trump administration. What's he suing it for? He's suing to allow illegal aliens to capitalize upon quote unquote rights that they're entitled to. And in California, you're given more privileges if you're there illegally. So if you're a non-citizen, you enjoy more privileges than you do if you're a native-born American. And you can see this in things like the incident where a woman was shot by an illegal alien vagrant, and the vagrant wasn't deported, and he wasn't even given prison time. A Patriot's Guide to History. That's the name of the book. Yeah, I was. Yeah, I thought it was. I thought it was something along those lines. But yeah, going back to my point, California is sort of, and Victor Davis Hanson has written a lot of great pieces about this. It's sort of a post-American state, the first real post-American state. You have a state which is divided almost equally between between several different minorities, Asian Americans, African Americans, Hispanics, and white Americans. I think it's like 40, 20, 15, with, the remainder being, Pacific Islanders, Native Americans, i.e. American Indians. Yeah. Also, the plebiscites. The California was at the forefront of the progressive movement. A lot of progressive initiatives, and one of those were popular referenda. So you could vote instead of just waiting for the legislature to either approve or reject laws. You could put something on the ballot if enough citizens supported it and approve it. And this is something that has been beginning in the early 90s. This is something that's been completely squashed by an unelected judiciary. So, for example, Proposition 187, which limited the amount of benefits extended to illegal aliens in California, that was stopped by a Carter administration, a Carter-appointed judge, Thelton Henderson. Prop 226, which eliminated affirmative action, even though it was eventually upheld on appeal, that was initially there was an injunction against that. The Proposition 8, I could just go on and on with all of these initiatives that were prevented from being enacted because of the unelected judiciary. So you have an unelected judiciary basically dictating what is allowable in terms of they're basically they basically arrogated to themselves the right to legislate. You have a populace which has no real commonalities, and you basically have a completely dysfunctional central government in Sacramento and a corrupt political class. And this is kind of the future of America. And in that sense, Kamala Harris is the perfect pick, especially if she's going to assume office without being elected, which is, I mean, I don't wish ill health on anyone, but you have to imagine that Joe Biden will be forced to either resign or something will happen to prevent him from being the president. And according to our Constitution, the person who will step in is the vice president. So you'll have a Gerald Ford situation. Hi, Scott, where the vice president, an unelected vice president, and for those of you who remember, the reason Gerald Ford became president was because the vice president who had been elected, Spiro Agnew, was forced to resign because of a criminal case in the state of Maryland when he was governor. So he was forced to resign. Nixon appointed Ford, who was confirmed by the Senate, and once Nixon resigned, Ford became president. So that's what you can expect if Biden is elected. He'll be forced by one way or another, he'll be forced to step down, and you'll have not only an unelected vice president, but you'll have an unelected president, but you'll have a president who was so unpopular that she was forced to drop out before any of the major nominating contests. So it's not even like Elizabeth Warren, say, who was I think her highest, she was in second or third place. I think she was in her highest her biggest victory was when she lost to Biden in Massachusetts, and I think she came in second. But it's not even like Elizabeth Warren. She was not even fourth or fifth. She was so unpopular, and her campaign was so was so inexpertly run that she had to. Let me get a drink of water. I'm sorry. Now I feel like, speaking of failed presidential candidates, now I feel like Marco Rubio. I'm having to drink a bottle of water on air, but sorry. But yeah, you have someone who's not even like Elizabeth Warren, someone who really was not desired by anyone in the Democratic Party, except for a small cultish clique. And to speak to that point, you see this a lot on Twitter, and I think this is one of the appealing features of a Kamala Harris candidacy. The fact that she doesn't alienate the Hillary Clinton base. The people who are the Hillary Clinton dead enders, these people who are kind of like Hiro Noda, that Japanese soldier who stayed in the Philippines until 1970 something, raiding Filipino villages and shooting people because he was convinced the Second World War hadn't ended, despite the fact that, he was bombarded with leaflets, and emissaries from Japan came over and told him that the war had ended. The Hillary Clinton supporters are kind of like that Japanese soldier. They still want Hillary and still think that Hillary is president. So Kamala Harris is, Hira Inoda. I'm probably mispronouncing that name, but there's actually a good video about him on the YouTube channel OK Eyes Weird Stories. He has a 2-part video about that guy, which is kind of interesting. But yeah, her supporters still want her to be president, and Biden, or the people managing Biden to be more precise, they realize that they can't pick Hillary Clinton as vice president. That would be just insane. So the next best thing is nominating someone like Kamala Harris, who retains Hillary supporters, who 99% of the people who are Hillary diehards and Clinton diehards will flock to her. It's not like the Bernie Sanders. It's not like the Bernie bros who are more divided. Almost every Hillary Clinton supporter will be okay with this pick, and in fact enthusiastic. So Kamala Harris is the closest thing to Hillary Clinton that Biden could have chosen. So that's one of the reasons that this is a good pick from a Democratic standpoint. That's one of the reasons. I actually thought, hi David. I actually thought that Susan Rice would be the choice. She's kind of like Hillary. She's like a younger, more appealing, because she has something that Hillary Clinton doesn't, which is intersectionality. So she's not only a woman, but she's a biracial woman. So she has intersectionality, which Hillary Clinton did not. So she's like a better version of Hillary Clinton. So that's a point in her favor. But Susan Rice, who I thought had a good chance of being the nominee for vice president, I actually think she had more going for her, and I could ultimately be right. Yeah, she's a Hillary Albright protege. That's a good point. She was one of the Valkyries, so her Samantha Power and Hillary Clinton, they were called the Valkyries, and these were the women in the State Department who were constantly urging war. They wanted more and more Middle Eastern overseas wars. They were the ones that persuaded, probably along with the intelligence agencies, I'm convinced they were the ones that persuaded Barack Obama to bomb Libya, to go along with his friend Nicolas Sarkozy and invade. I'm sorry. I didn't. I'm sorry if that. Uh, they were the ones that convinced Hillary to invade Libya and depose Muammar Gaddafi. So Susan Rice was part of that trio. She was at the heart of the Libyan consulate debacle in Benghazi, running weapons to Syria. Hi, Ruxby. So she was a pivotal part of the State Department, and not just the Obama State Department, but even going back to Bill Clinton. In fact, there's a great book called Shakedown by Kenneth Timmerman, and he describes the fire, like the diplomatic fires that Susan Rice had to put out as a result of Jesse Jackson being a roving ambassador to Africa. So he would go to places like Nigeria and Ghana and try to basically shake, as the title suggests, shake down people for oil concessions, try to get oil contracts for his son Youssef, try to basically enrich himself. And he would make all of these statements that people like Susan Rice would have to disavow, particularly with regard to Liberia and Sierra Leone. Sierra Leone at the time was run by a UN-appointed leader, and they were fighting Fodi Sanko, who was a Gaddafi-trained terrorist who was essentially using armies of boys that he had conscripted to harvest diamonds and sending them to his friend Charles Taylor, who is in control of Libya, just massacring people. And Jesse Jackson was aligned with these two figures at the time. So Susan Rice has been a part of she's what I would call the deep state candidate. She would have been kind of the Democratic equivalent of Dick Cheney. When George W. Bush selected Dick Cheney was the head of the VP selection committee, and everyone was shocked. In fact, there were a bunch of jokes about that, the fact that he picked himself. But Dick Cheney had been in Washington, had been kind of part of the swamp since the Ford administration. So he had been, for 3 decades, he had been part of the Washington, D.C. power structure. And once he became vice president, most people acknowledged that he was going to be kind of a co-president. So that's what would have happened if Susan Rice had been selected, even though Biden's unique infirmities probably mean that anyone selected will take that role. But particularly if Susan Rice had been chosen, because this is a woman, her mother was one of the creators of the federal Pell Grant program. And her father, I believe, was the second Black member of the Federal Reserve Board of Governors. So both her mother and father were immensely powerful people. Is a Republican? Yeah, I remember hearing about that story at the time. It's kind of funny. I don't think they're related. I could be wrong about that. I don't think there's any relation, but I could be totally wrong about that. If someone in the comment section can correct me, but Yeah, so her parents were immensely powerful people. Her mother was, I think, the second black member of the Federal Reserve Board of Governors, and her father was the person who was in charge of creating the federal Pell Grant program. She herself has been, like I said, a staple of Democratic administrations and Democratic policy making circles. I think her mother was also joined the Brookings Institute. Um, is it the Brookings Institute? No, the Brookings Institution. Okay, so she and her family are immensely powerful, and she's kind of um maybe not comparable to Cheney, but I think she is pretty much because she's also along with the Obamas in charge of Netflix programming now. I think so. You have political, diplomatic, and cultural elites sort of merged into one person. So, um, so Susan Rice was the choice that I thought he was going to make, just because she would have been sort of like Cheney. She would have been the deep state's choice. And despite the way these uh, uprisings have been portrayed, I don't think this is a bottom up uprising. It's more akin to the Cultural Revolution, where you have an edict, basically people being manipulated, power brokers manipulating certain sections of the population to to basically someone was making a joke about Amazon, the fact that Amazon sponsored the riots because they were destroying every small business. So in that sense, I don't think there would have been a problem, despite this, this idea that, Bernie Bros and Democratic socialists are taking over. I think it's more a case of woke. And I hate to use the term capitalism because it's not really capitalism in the in the capitalist sense, but basically rent seekers is what how I would describe them. So, like, in that sense, I think Susan Rice would have been a great pick for Biden from their perspective. But again, Kamala Harris is sort of. I think Kamala Harris is the pick he goes with because she can be a proxy for him, going all over, harping on these issues, kind of pretending that she didn't spend decades as a district attorney and an attorney general and someone who traded on her sexuality in order to gain political power. Like, she can pretend that she's this strong woman, the strong multiracial woman who's sticking up for the people, and she's very pro-abortion, and you have to support infanticide now in order to be on a national Democratic ticket. I think there's one pro-life member of the House of Representatives, Henry Queller in Texas, and he barely survived his primary. Yeah, strong, independent woman. But aesthetically, she is a good choice if Biden simply just wants to run out the clock, which I think is the Democratic plan. I mean, that's one of the reasons businesses aren't opening in these blue states. Cuomo has said we're not going to open until 2021. So basically, we're going to deliberately maintain a depression until Trump is out of office. So, am I buffering? Is that what that means, Inky? Yeah, Scott. Yeah, it's going to be a weird. Okay, I thought I was buffering. I thought that's what that meant. But yeah, it's going to be a strange 2.5 months. But I think I'm going to wrap this up because I'm almost at 45 minutes, and that's insanely long. Like, I don't think I've done a video this long since my Quran read through. Yeah, the Biden interviews, even the Biden pre-recorded campaign advertisements are painful to watch. I don't know how you bollocks a campaign advertisement when you're reading from a teleprompter and it's pre-recorded, but somehow those are still embarrassing. Yeah, the China thing, that's going to be interesting. Oh, thanks. I'm glad some people enjoyed my Quran series, even though yeah, for those of you who have Muslims who are curious, you can direct them to that. I think there are over 100 videos in that series. Most of them are um, in digestible form, especially after we get through the after we get through like the midway point when the verses start getting shorter and shorter. Anyway, like I said, I don't want to make this an hour, so I'm going to sign off. Thanks everyone for watching. Seth, Tower Time, Alejandro, David, CK, John, Inky, Rox B. I will see you all next time.